right, welcome to Legacies, everyone. Legacies is brought to you by Aveo, leaders in sustainable vape hardware. I'm joined this week by Eli Core and Dylan Thiel of Dabstract, popular award-winning brand. Gents, how you doing? Welcome to Legacies.
Thanks, Tom.
Thank you. Thank you.
Listen, Eli, we go back a little ways. We've been chatting for some time. We've gotten to know each other quite well, Dylan as well. You guys have had some massive success with the Dabstract brand throughout the US, obviously an MSO, which is completely fucking crazy compared to what we have to deal with in Canada. So we're gonna go through some of that history, what that takes, what partnerships look like. But congrats so far on the award-winning brand of Dabstract, and we're gonna look at the legacy behind that as well, because Dylan, you and your brother Derek, obviously pounding the pavement, working hard, doing what you can to build that brand up. And it's quite interesting. You know, when we look at various US brands, some have staying power. They've got traction, they've got the MSO rights, and others just not so well. I'll leave it at well. But anyways, thanks again for joining me. Let's first look at the formation of, when Union Cannabis Group became a thing. But prior to, Dylan, you and Derek, you spent a lot of time understanding the extract side of things, honing your skill, honing your craft. Where was Dabstract born, and what were you doing prior to the formation of the brand?
Yeah, good question, Tom. I think, Derek and I sort of dabbled in the gray market for Derek for 3-4 years, myself for about a year and a half. And that was really when BHO extraction first became a thing, where everyone was running the hot butane extractions with trim off the hills of NorCal. And yeah, that's where we got our start. We had Grey Wolf's like 7th system. So we were really early adopters of hydrocarbon extraction. Obviously the gray market's not for everybody. It definitely wasn't for me. And wanted to get out of that. And that's right when Colorado and Washington went recreational. And we sort of jumped right on that opportunity with some of the connections that we had from our gray market days. We got a license up in Clay Hill in Washington and started piecing that together. We had some big dreamers a part of that project, and we had a lot of really, like, early on, we had some of the biggest equipment that anybody's ever seen, and we were had some of Precision's first PX Pros up there, and we got a gigantic PX40 machine that barely anybody was running, or I don't think anybody ran at that time. And we're just trying to piece that together in essentially a glorified garage up in middle of Washington. And we definitely went through a lot of problematic times, I would say, early on, as any startup will.
Right.
And we probably overextended a little bit and try to do cultivation in the mountains of Washington, and dealing with snow, collapsing greenhouses and everything else. And so it was just it was a whirlwind up there. But we wouldn't be where we are today without that experience. And through that, we've been able to get the brand out there. We were able to come up with unique, innovative products really, really early on. Anything from, Tom, it's funny, we were like one of the first companies to do terp sugar in Washington State.
Okay.
And at the time, just like wet terpene, THCA consistency, and everybody in the market was like, "Where's my shatter? This is butane soup," all that sort of stuff. And so it's just like we were trying to do all these new and unique things, and the market just wasn't receiving it at the time. And it's just funny how the market has, shifted and matured, and now you can't even sell a slab of shatter.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so all those products have now are mainstays. They're still part of our product portfolio to this day. Yeah. And I think what's really interesting about the Washington market specifically, and us being in that market early on, is more so than Colorado, or really what I've seen from other markets, is there was so much innovation going on in the Washington market in those early days. It was very, very competitive,
Mm,
between us and probably about 12 other brands, and so we were all really pushing each other to be better extractors, create better products, and so I really just, kinda take that as a blessing,
yeah.
just how that market matured, and how, if you didn't innovate, you were going out of business, and so it
Mhm.
was just nonstop for, I mean, better part of 7 years of, 7 days a week, 12 hours a day, just trying to do the best things we possibly could, trying to, I mean, early on, no one could, isolate THCA, and so we were, like, trying to make THCA crystalline, and, we created our HG product, which is still a cornerstone of all of our products today, and, without that opportunity in Washington, uh, I don't know if we'd still be here.
Mm. Wow. Well, you mentioned, competition. I think it's interesting because no one wants competition, right? Like no matter what you're doing, it's like, man, but at the end of the day, I mean, the iron sharpens iron, right? And I think that without a certain amount of competition, you're not going to be forced to innovate. You're not going to look at those innovative products that maybe they're a little bit different or they help, with your USP or your own unique selling proposition. But I'm curious, why the big blowout of machinery and extraction equipment right out of the gate? I mean, most most start with, you know, they're blowing BHO out of the small tubes at first and trying to figure it out. But you're like, nah, we got this. Let's
Yeah.
go in big.
Let's go big. Yeah, I mean, we were dreamers, and early market, we were saying, how much of this market can we capture,
Mm.
very early on, and so, um, yeah, we were very hopeful in those early days, and obviously things don't always pan out, and as I said, it's just a really, really competitive market, and so trying to get that market share and try to create sales, create a brand, and do all these things early on with, frankly, I'm an engineering background, Tom. I didn't do a lot of these things, and so we were really having to be adaptive, and bring resources in and to just try to make this whole thing work. And frankly, we were really, really lucky that it all did. And can't echo this enough. We just learned so much in those early days, that are still we're still reminded of those experiences to this day.
Hmm. Yeah. And do you find with that experience, like, did that so well, it seems like a lot of the brands, at least throughout the US, the ones that have a history, they got started in Washington. Typically, we see some California roots and what was going on there, but then with the excitement of Washington, and then you mentioned Colorado, they were the next on the scenes. But was that demand there already within the med side? Like, was it just the gray market? I mean, black market, whatever we want to call them, dispensaries at the time. Like, what was driving that demand early on for the products that you guys were producing?
Yeah, I think, Washington had that, medical market, and we came in a little bit late, and so there was some brands that's, had that brand equity and, were able to, carry on from the medical to the recreational side, but we had to come in and directly start competing with those brands, um, and yeah, I think our approach on products and processes was a little bit difficult for the regular consumer to adopt early on.
Mhm.
Again, with trip sugar or doing THC extractions or HG products or our opal consistency and all these different things. It was, uh, with the medical market just having so much experience with, hey, where's my slab of shatter? It was hard to get people excited and interested in those products, until they try them, right?
Mm.
And like that's a big part of how we see ourselves is like, we might not be able to do as much marketing as some of these large, well-funded MSOs, or we might not be able to do X, Y, or Z. But if I get someone to try our products,
Mhm.
I'm pretty confident that they're gonna, buy into the Dabstract brand. Um, and we won over that consumer, and it's sort of our promise on the back end to make sure that we continue to support that consumer and we don't put um, anything that I consider everything I put out there that has my name on it, and so like
Yeah.
I I I need to hold that promise to people too.
Yeah. Let me say this. You extractors you're wired different because, flower producers, And I'm not talking just the giants. I mean, flower producers at the end of the day, they're like, yeah, it's, quality is what I stand for. But I've heard this time and time again from extractors. This is my name. Like, yeah, I can't screw around with this. At the end of the day, people relate, in this case, Dabstract with the Thiel brothers, right? They understand, okay, there's a background. But, and I want to understand the legacy roots, and we'll weave that into the story a little bit more as we go, because MSOs are a little bit different. I've seen there's the giants, right? You've got your Cura Leaves and your True Leaf and all these companies, and a lot of them are vertically integrated, right? Which is, I think the cornerstone for the success with what you guys have built is that partnership, right? Understanding partnerships, sourcing, distribution, marketing, even. And I know you handle as much as you can in house. At what point in time did you go, we need to pull in a crazy lawyer? And then Eli, when do you join the team? You go, yeah, I don't want to deal with this shit anymore. We need to bring someone else in.
Yeah. Yeah. I think I did a little too much lawyer work early on, and very quickly realized that that's not my skill set. So we needed Eli, the powerhouse attorney, to come onto the team.
Yeah, no doubt. So Eli, when did you join Dabstract? Or I guess in this case, it's for everyone listening. Union Cannabis Group is the parent company of Dabstract. But when did you join? And I mean, you're out of Illinois, you're a Chicago boy. Like,
For
you're
sure.
like, yeah, I'm going all in on cannabis. I love what the Field Bros are doing. I'm coming in.
Yeah, I had a very empathetic and patient wife is what allowed me to do this, is what I'll say.
Wait, but first of
Um,
all of us in cannabis do.
yeah, exactly, and a happy Mother's Day to her.
Yes, yeah.
Um, in 2018, I actually, as luck would have it, I was a younger attorney. I practiced a lot of M&A, corporate, securities, commercial work. But I had represented a lot of smaller and mid-sized companies almost as inside counsel. So I would learn about their businesses. I would really try and connect with the business owners. And I actually happenstantially got a call from my brother, and they said, I actually ran into a cannabis company. I think you should talk about, maybe you could do some work with them. And as that happened, that was Union Cannabis Group Dabstract.
Mm.
And I'll say I didn't know what I didn't know about cannabis at the time. But at the same time, it was a brand that has and continues to have phenomenal products, phenomenal sales, and a really great team of people. And I think that's really what drew me into the business, was having the opportunity to work on new and exciting issues today, in a new industry that really didn't exist, and frankly is in its nascent stages right now. We look at but a lot of the capital cycles, we look at growth, we look at other industries that started off like this: alcohol, spirits, all of that. And what we see is that there was an enormous platform to grow a wonderful brand out of Washington into a national brand. And so what I'd say is, while we might not be a classic vertically integrated MSO, we're a multi-state brand.
Mhm.
And that's something that we're very proud of. That's something that really traces to our fantastic partners and the relationships we've developed. And it really comes down to our human capital. Pound for pound, I don't think that there's a stronger team out there.
Wow.
When it comes to our field reps, when it comes to our brand manager, when it comes to our head of sales, when it comes to Derek and Dylan as operators, I always say they're operators. And to me, that means that you could bring them anywhere and they could talk shop and chew the fat with the best of them, and really, really highlight why it's such a great product and a great brand and what to expect from it. And
Mm.
so as the years went on, I started as general counsel, but I ended up matriculating to more of an executive based role that handled a lot of the expansion, capital, and relationship building that I think is really critical to every industry, but cannabis in particular.
Yeah. Wow. As I always get this when my guests explain, the history, how they came into something, and it's just questions, 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 right? I should be writing, right? Diary of a CEO, writing down a million questions at the same time. That's how I got my head. It's got to be much different for you guys, though, right? And again, I've seen the full verts, the big guys, the big players in the US. In Canada, we don't. There's not a lot of full vert, right? Like it's, you've got your SNDLs and a couple others. They have a certain tie to retail, but in a lot of cases, that's about as far as it goes. Where you're, I don't know, what is it, GTI? They've got, I don't know how many locations across, the US. When you're assessing, so you start Washington, Colorado, you're assessing a new market. Like, what is it? Is it just the market opening and you're like, yep, doors are open, let's go in? Or is it, oh, maybe we need some time for things to settle a little bit? Like, what excites you about a new market? How do you assess a new market? And then what are those steps? Because I realize, now you need to find source, right? Because, not like Canada, you can't send product from coast to coast, right? In the US, correct me if I'm wrong, but you've got to find a supplier, someone that's going to, Dylan, I'm sure you bring in all your expertise as we've discussed before, help them get set up. No, this is how we want to produce. You need to do it this way. We need it extracted this way. But how are you assessing that? How are you choosing your partners? What gets you excited about the new markets that open? Because I mean, like New York just opened. Like, what the hell? It's like they've been in existence for 10 years already.
For sure, for sure. And what I'll say is that uh, it's really case by case, and
Okay.
it's extremely circumstantial. What I'll say is there's some guiding lights that we always follow. For example, if we can focus on a limited license state, something where there's going to be less price compression. There's a lot of telltale things that we've seen in other markets. Dylan and the whole team has learned from Washington, from Missouri, from Illinois, from Michigan. And you really have to come with a tailored program and find the absolute right partner for that market.
Mm.
We did a fantastic job finding a partner in Illinois, for example, fully vertical, female owned, one of the independents, grew tremendous flower, has a strong supply chain, and owned a couple dispensaries. So you could play in what you'd call trade service,
Hmm.
reciprocity, whatever you'd like to call that.
Yeah.
And so, in a lot of ways, each market is unto itself, and you have to find pound for pound the greatest partner that you can. But that means something different. And I know sometimes it means something different between Dylan and I. For
Mm.
example, he'll be focused a ton on production. And there are a couple things, Dylan, that I might have left out.
Yeah, as you just pointed out, it's sort of marrying uh, what sort of operations do they have, what sort of capabilities do they have, and then what sort of distribution that they have, and then pairing those things together within any given market. I mean, you mentioned New York as an example, and while that's a state we're interested in right now, everyone's flooding to that market, right?
Yeah.
And it's going to be highly competitive, and they're still dealing with getting the black market out of there or whatever that's looking like. And so, frankly, New York, while we're exploring it and it's on our radar, we're not necessarily jumping to it like a lot of other operators.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
I mean, there has to be some draw because so one, everyone's flooding in. I wondered if it felt like everyone was just in wait for New York to open and then floodgates open, everyone comes rushing in. Couple questions out of that though. So when you assess a new market, you're like, yeah, it makes sense to go there. We've seen a lot of in Canada, brands get burnt a lot, right? So if they're not controlling the inputs and the process and all of that, they don't, all of a sudden a crop failure, something happens. Oh, I can get more money exporting. Like, how important is that when you're choosing? You're talking about Illinois and having this great operator, woman owned, great, but like you have to, as a brand, you have to have certain rest and pause and feel goods at night to go, yeah, okay, they can keep up with the demand. Because I mean, we talked offline about how many how many pens and stuff you guys are putting out. It's a lot, man. Like, I don't know a lot of places that can keep up with that. Like, do you have checklists? Okay, you guys are good. Is it talking to other partners or vendors they work with? Like, how are you assessing that?
I think a big part of it is getting to know them and going through a strong diligence process.
Mm.
Our CFO, Adam Siskin, has put together about a 9 to 10 point weighted scale on what makes a good partner, right? But he comes from the CPG world. He comes from a highly analytical space where cannabis is more of an art and a science
Mhm.
when it comes to developing partnerships. And so while the metrics could be perfect on paper, they could have a disagreeable management team. They could not be capitalized well. They could not be really good at planning for the future. But what I'll say is a good partnership is an evolving conversation. and you have to start with as many variables in your back pocket as you can. So
Mm,
we do all the work up front to meet as many people in a new market that we want to go into as possible. At any given time for any 4 to 5 states, we're talking to 5 to 8 people, and that really, at every different level, right? At independently owned vertical all the ways to, publicly traded MSOs.
mm,
And so for us, in a lot of ways, it's finding the right partner for the right place. But then the truth is born over time, right? We started incrementally, for example, in Illinois with our vape pens, and then we added in concentrates, and then we added in all-in-one devices, which are taking off. And
mm.
so over time, you build trust on both sides, and that's critical for the strength of a long-term relationship. And then you start introducing new genetics, and then you start understanding more of their cultivation and production, and things evolve. And so I think that you have to start with as many answers as you can. But like I said just now, the truth is born over time.
Yeah, no doubt. And so Dylan, when you're, I mean, the Abstract brand as a brand is pretty synonymous with the industry now. As these markets are opening up, do you have would-be operators, those looking at licensing in these new markets that are like just approaching you now, going, look, it would make a lot of sense to have Dabstract in our market because of the notoriety that you've already built across other states. We feel that it'll do well. And then the consumer side as well, right? Because again, this is where I'm split, right? Because I'm not going to say you can just market in the US, but the restrictions aren't quite the same as they are because at the federal level, much different, right? For us in Canada, anyways. But do you have a certain push pulls where you feel you're being pulled into new markets more so than just taking a keen eye at it and going, yeah, okay, like this might make sense.
Yeah, it's I feel very fortunate that we do have, like, consumers from different states just, begging for us to come in any given market, or
Darn, eh?
different opera
That's
what
good.
was that?
Says it, darn, eh? That's gotta be shitty.
Yeah, right, exactly. And, we do get, operators reaching out too, "How do we get your brand in here? How do we grow this?" And so it's frankly, you know, again, feel so fortunate with the brand credibility that we've established over the last 9, 10 years now, where people are actively seeking us out. But in some markets, we're still very much like a West Coast brand,
Mm,
um, or now a Midwest brand. So if we're going out to the East Coast or the South or any of these other markets, while there's consumers out there that know us, there's still a big marketing lift that we need to do to get our brand out there, get our messaging across to people, and make people understand what we're trying to bring to the table.
mm, interesting. And when it comes to the supply, I mean, are you dictating with your partners? It needs to be this cultivar because we need these trichome heads. We need this much extraction coming out of it. Like, in some cases they don't even have air quote plants in ground yet, right? So you don't necessarily know how well they're going to perform because it's a new market opening. Is it based on this is their team? I mean, Eli, you just mentioned, you've got this CFO type checklist, great, but that only takes you so far, right? We saw this in the early days in Canada. This is where all the billions of dollars came and went, which is, oh, I can do this, and meanwhile it's someone that was growing in their basement for I don't know 10 years, and then all of a sudden at scale they just shit the bed, right? And they couldn't source the proper genetics, they couldn't get the yield that they were looking for, or whatever it might be. But how do you and just you're giving me a little bit of anxiety thinking about going into a new market. If I were in your shoes going, yeah, there's a lot of shit here that we need to assess when licensing is just starting to happen.
Right. I mean, as Eli pointed out, due diligence is just critical for us. Very quickly when you walk through someone's facility if they know what they're doing, and if you can do a licensing deal with them. Um, we need diverse genetic libraries at any licensee. We need someone who knows how to grow plants. We don't, as you pointed out, Tom, we don't want necessarily the closet grower and who's trying to do it large scale for the first time because we all know the amount of problems that can come up with
Mhm.
someone, making that increase. So, um, yeah, I can't dismiss how much operations or someone's skill set in operations, like, it can be so impactful for the success of our licensing arrangement.
Yeah. Have you found it easier as new markets are opening? Because obviously, let's say, the Washington, Colorado days, you've established partnerships, you've got, great opportunities there. I would assume as the other markets open, they also wanted to potentially move into those markets. Do you kind of just join hands and go in together, or is it always looking for, no, we need to establish new partnerships, we need roots, whatever it might be, or are you able to kind of couple together and move into these new markets together?
Yeah, we're all of the above. And I'll say that it's safest for a brand to diversify their licensee relationships and portfolio. That doesn't undermine the tenacity in which we support each and every one of our partners. But at the same time, for example, we're expanding to Massachusetts with our partner from Washington. We're looking at some multi-state deals with other partners that are familiar with us in some jurisdictions and want to go into those jurisdictions with us and others. So as time goes on, I'd say that Dabstract is creating what I call a compounding credibility
Oh,
in the
nice.
marketplace where we can come in, we can support our partner, we can support our products and our consumers. I think that's a huge part of it. And I think in a lot of ways, when you look at a new state, sometimes it's give and take. Sometimes the state will open up and we won't want to go there, just as Dylan had described with New York. When New York went legal, it had onerous taxes, there was a huge illicit market, there were stores all over the place you couldn't tell. Other brands were feeding in stores that you didn't know if they were legit or not. And I think in a lot of different ways, what we're trying to just call out is it's almost like fishing. You have to sort of cast your line and pull in and pull out based on your feeling on it. A
Mm,
big component too, as we start to grow as a brand, are our relationships in the market with other licensee or licensed brands.
mm.
So we have a number of advisors who are in that space. They can make referrals to good partners, people they want to work with. So, in a lot of different ways, surrounding yourself with a strong community and growing that community has really benefited the brand and its consumers.
Hmm. No, that makes sense. What do you see at the retail level? Again, I'm not as familiar with this in the US. In Canada, we've got, let's call it 1,500 plus brands, or well, sorry, LPs, and then the brands are exponential growth there, right? And these brands will have reps, and they visit the retail locations. And province to province, it's somewhat unique in certain cases. But these reps are going in, their sell sheets. You got to carry my product. It's the best product. You just got to try it. Once you get it, you're going to want to carry it. What's it like in the US when a market is being established? How do you build that relationship at the retail level so that, one, not only are they just going to have a first time order, but repeat customers? How do you gain distribution?
Yeah, I think it's really important for us to take care of the budtenders. First and foremost, I mean, budtenders sell your product, and you need them to feel as though um, not only are they supported, but they understand what you're trying to do as a brand and what sort of products you're trying to bring to market, so that there's a level of trust there. Um, and so, yeah, that's big for us. So in any market, we're going to do whatever we can to help support the budtenders, whether that's giving them product samples, giving them education, supporting them at events, or supporting the stores in really any way that we can, because they're at the end of the day going to be distributing our products.
Yeah, yeah. Well, that's what, a lot of them have said, right? You win over your bud tender, now you've got your advocate, because again, it's very difficult to market cannabis to the consumer right now, right? And I know that's both sides, both Canada and the US. Um, how did you I'm just curious, I realize concentrates, extracts, but you're still within the vape space. In California, I don't know if this is still going on. When I was with Akerna, there was, we had acquired some technology that was supposed to be anti-counterfeit technology, right? There was a lot of counterfeit vapes coming from the black market. Did you guys go through any of that with a prominent brand like Dabstract? Was there any counterfeit Dabstract, vapes or anything making it to market, or did they leave you alone?
Yeah, we haven't seen it, fortunately. We have seen like a few things here and there, but never. Um, Yeah, I think like 710, for example, was always dealing with that, or Cookies and some of those other like prominent California brands, but we've been able to stay away from that, fortunately.
Man, like I couldn't imagine. I mean, it's one like In alcohol, you don't see that. I mean, maybe Eli, I don't know, any case law, any
Yeah, no, no,
anything
no, and
going on?
and look, and I think there's different gradations, right? I think that there's flat out having an absolute one-to-one product, and then it just varies by, from there. And you have to work on infringement. You have to work on a lot of these things, just as as any company would. But I do think that there is going to be an advent of those kinds of issues as states become legal, as there may be some movement nationally. You're going to see it, and you're starting to see it in a bunch of different places all over the country with different results.
Mm.
So in a lot of ways, I think this is just that one item is a testament to the early stage of the industry, and it'll start to grow and evolve as the industry does itself.
Oh, okay, okay. Yeah, I still see it. I remember I'm just like, really? People are counterfeiting cannabis vape pens? But I guess, you mentioned cookies, Dylan. It's a big brand, right? Like, I guess if you're going to go after something, you want to try and get some movement, then yeah, that makes sense. Talk to me about hemp for a second. And, because we don't have to deal with this much in Canada. Cannabinoids, period, are regulated. In the US, I've had a few different US guests and I've heard differences of opinion, right? Which is, it's great. It helps normalize cannabis. It helps. And I'm like, "It's still hemp, I guess, at the end of the day." Obviously, it's not an input for you, but I'm just curious with what your thoughts are. And especially Eli, with your background in law, like, is this something that we should just be saying, you know what? Let it go. Then you've got, what is it, Newsom going, no, no hemp at all. Just forget it all. I don't know which side of this fence I'm sitting on yet. Help me understand this a little bit from a point of view as an operator in the US.
Yeah. Dylan, do you want to go back just quickly a little bit into the science behind it and the threshold, and then I can give some thoughts on more of the macro condition?
Yeah, I think from my perspective on the hemp market is number one, you're talking about synthetic cannabinoids. You have all these different operators who are doing um, these refinement process to turn, CBD into D8, D9, THCA products that skirt around the regulations in any other market. And they're not held to any sort of regulatory like framework, right? They can do whatever they want. They can sell at gas stations. They can do whatever. And I think from like moral perspective or um, just understanding how these products are made, I'm really concerned that some of these operators are cutting corners and putting unsafe products out there. That being said, I think there's some opportunities in that space if they're held to the same sort of regulatory framework that uh, we are in the traditional space. And so, yeah, I think I just have some practical concerns about those products.
Yeah, the testing is the big one for me, I think.
Yeah.
Obviously in Canada, especially, we're pretty hard on things, not near as hard as they are in Japan. But, natural healthcare products, right? A lot of them sit on shelves untested. Okay, there's been a lot of argument about, well, CBD products and minor cannabinoids should be available over the counter, maybe not gas stations, but and then when I look at it from, okay, widely available helps to destigmatize because we're still dealing with that, right? And we're going to be for quite some time.
Hmm.
But the testing is the big one for me going, yeah, like this, it's bad enough. We know product makes it to market with, faulty lab tests, or I'll use the word faulty because we know there's a lot of nefarious bullshit going on behind the scenes, both Canada and US. But it's the testing. Like, botrytis is real. Like, this shit lives on your plants, and I've seen it make its way into market. And that's even at the regulated side, let alone on testing. So, Eli, what do you have to add to that when it comes to, that whole hemp market that's like, it's just booming. It's
It
booming.
is. It is. And you see a lot of multi-state groups going into it or augmenting their product line or even their physical retail strategy. We've seen some retail, MSOs turn their retail into brick and mortar hemp stores. And so in a lot of ways, I'll say this, neither side is going anywhere fast.
Mm,
And so the arc of history is going to have to bring both of them together in some respect to resolve itself. Too much money has been spent on either side and in different regions. What I do find interesting is that while there's a federal loophole for hemp, states are increasingly becoming more aggressive in their regulation of hemp products. So you're seeing some cognitive dissonance between the two markets, and they're actually the inverse. One's federally illegal, state
Yeah.
regulated. The other one is the opposite. And so what you're trying to do is sort of find a twisted Venn diagram to reach as many consumers as possible. Now, I'll say that a lot of these groups have been met with success. It's an additional way to get cash flow. It's an additional way to avoid raising capital. It's an additional way to open your umbrella to more consumers and have it be more visible. But really, it has to be a defined, concerted effort that's highly planned and very well articulated to do well. Now, my other concern is that what if the loophole is closed?
Mhm.
Or what if it's resolved in a way that other folks don't really want? Then those groups may be caught flat-footed. So for us, we really try and take the information that we have on hand currently and try and build strategy around that. And while we certainly are exploring that in a variety of categories, in a lot of ways, our sole focus is to grow Dabstract in the rec space as of today.
Wow. Wow. Haven't really looked at it that way. And as you were explaining that, there's a lot of earnings reports that just came out last week and the week prior too. And some of these giants, yeah, man, I thought Canada and some of our pubcos and these guys were doing bad, but I mean, who was it? Cresco, like $501 million potentially behind in taxes or assumed taxes. My question is this: do you see opportunity? I mean, when they say when a giant falls, they fall bigger than anyone. Is there opportunity here to gain market share in some of these underperforming markets where the giants are currently living, just based on the fact that, like, where are they going to get any money anymore? Like, again, in Canada, the well kind of dried up, but now we're starting to see some success, and there's a little bit of maturing happening. Things are starting to even out a little bit. We even have U.S. interests. There's some companies looking to move into or into Canada now. Where do you guys sit, and do you see opportunity with the giants in the US and their just atrocious earnings calls?
Well, while I can't speak to their finances, what I will say is that I think there is a lot of opportunity. I think in a lot of respects, some of these groups are undervalued. I think there's a lot of opportunity in the finance space. You're starting to see the advent of what I'd call the finance operator, where there's groups that are pulling together a lot of different operations from different states, and they're going to need brands to put into their infrastructure to help generate sales and sell through and
Mhm.
velocity. So I think in so many ways, what we're seeing is, like we had talked about earlier, there's going to be a constant evolution and there's going to be new opportunities. I think Dabstract's one of those rare companies that's able to pivot quickly and able to really meet its destiny by partnering with the right groups in the right moments. There may be a time when it's smart for Dabstract to pair with one of the larger groups, depending on their state and all of the other factors that we've already discussed. But what I will say is that I do not believe the market today is what it will be in a year, as in 3 years, as in 5 years.
Yeah.
You're going to see a lot of different change. A lot of the groups that we would have loved to be acquired by 5 years ago would be very difficult for our board to approve today.
Yeah.
And so we're at a really incredible time where there will be new states coming online in the rec space. There will be new capital coming into the market. And I will say that while a lot of the folks out there say that there isn't an equity market out there and it's only debt, I think there's equity for the right groups.
Mm.
There's equity for the groups that have a pathway to profitability, that have some cash flow, that have a strong management team, that have good intellectual property, and that have really maintained in competitive spaces. So I do believe that there will be opportunities for when groups grow and fail, but I think it's not all or nothing. It's not just going to be a crop of failures. We're starting to see new MSOs emerge, especially those that are privately held and
Mhm.
that are really run in a way that are dialed in. It's not just getting retail for the sake of retail, but where are the stores located? How many parking spots are there? Everything is
Yeah.
now much more of a scrutinous inquiry, which is a good thing, I think, for the market.
Yeah. I think it just took a certain amount of maturity. But on that, as you're talking about, the MSOs and these bigger companies, Dylan, where do you and your brother sit when it comes to, you've got legacy roots, right? And we see this a lot. Even hell, even our podcast has been criticized. Well, you're called legacies. You should only have legacy operators. I'm like, do you understand the fucking term legacy? Do you even know what that means, right? But in certain cases, you know, individuals and operators such as yourself that have those legacy roots, they grow, they get, they gain that notoriety, they become MSOs, they've got brand distribution across, and as more states open up, there is an opportunity where some of these bigger ones go, fuck, they're doing really well. Maybe we should look at an acquisition and we bring Dabstract and Union Cannabis Group under our umbrella. Is there is there ever a time that you go, no, that just doesn't make sense. It's not who we are. Like, how do you? I'm sure you guys
Oh,
talk about this.
absolutely. Yeah, yeah. There's definitely some groups that, we're just not aligned with. Some of the groups out there that are, out there just to try to do a cash grab or something like that. We're really looking for groups that want to be part of the industry, want to be part of this culture for the long term. And we're not necessarily looking for those groups that are, hey, how do we flip this? How do we flood the market and just do this cash grab and get out? Um, yeah, so we need to be aligned with the group and their long-term goals.
Yeah. What's the hardest market you've entered so far? And hard can be taken a number of ways, but I think you know what I mean. Which one kept you up at night, made you lose sleep? You didn't want to
Well, I
eat.
mean,
You're
Tom,
hitting the hitting your own
I think I
product
could speak.
more.
Yeah, Tom, I think I can speak for Eli. We don't really sleep much, so
Yeah, that's
um,
true. Okay, yeah.
That's the truth.
That's true. I get it. I get it.
What I will say is that each market presents its unique issues. For example, in Michigan, we only launched with our all-in-one because it's
Mm,
hyper competitive. There's a ton of compression. Entering into a space with our full product lineup wouldn't have been the smartest thing. So what we did was we focused on a really wonderful all-in-one device that had come out right around that time, and we really pushed it, and now we can't keep it on the shelves. We had to bring inventory stateside so that our partner could meet demand. And so in a lot of different ways, each place is totally different and unique. And I think they pose totally different conundrums in each and every case.
hmm. Wow. Well, that's not a that's not a bad problem to have.
No, 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 but obviously, as you could imagine, we would wanna enter in with our full
Yeah.
product line. We wanna enter in with a ton of marketing, and we were told, "Look, don't spend the money there. Don't
Wow.
focus on that. Focus on the product, focus on the all-in-one, and it'll build itself." And over the years, demand has grown, and I think it's a very interesting allegory and story for us because in other states, we have to spend a lot on marketing. We have
um,
to get out there. And so because each state is so unique, it actually puts us in a really tremendous position of being able to make those game time decisions as we're entering a market as what's appropriate for that partner and that space. Some
Mm.
of the groups that we partner with already have a very strong sales team. We don't need to focus on, spending money on that. We have to focus on the velocity and sell through. So we hire a field rep and we work with them to really become part of the community, have their name out there, and have them associated with Dabstract. So it really becomes a cult brand in that place.
Yeah. Wow. And so when you interesting, right? So how big is the product line right now? And then how do you assess let's say, I don't know if you have 10 or 15, I'm not sure where you sit on that. But in this case you go, no, all in ones is all we're going to enter with, which makes sense in this case. But like, are you using data? Are you using consumer sentiment? Like, where are you getting all of your information to make that assessment of, no, we're going to bring 1, 5, 10 of our products in?
but yeah, I mean, we're kind of data hounds. In any
Nice.
market, we do a ton of data analysis and due diligence to see what are the trends, where are we anticipating this market to go, what is the consumer sentiment in that market, and what are they looking for. So we have to tailor that approach for any market we go into.
Hmm. And do you find that which market, I guess, have you seen flower was super dominant? I mean, Michigan's a weird market, right? It's
Yeah,
it's a fire market, but it's a weird market where flower, new products enter. Now we're good with flower, guys. We're good with flower. But I mean, over time, it's starting to open up. Do you see? Is it just innovation? Is it new products entering market? Is it, are the consumers opening more? Meaning, it's not just your connoisseurs and your OGs. Now, grandma's starting to go to the dispensary. Like, what are you seeing in some of these markets, and why is it not just flower? Right? I guess that's my question.
I mean, I think I think you pointed it out. I think every market is different in its own way. Like the Michigan market you pointed out is vastly different from even Illinois, and it's the same region of the country. Or
Yeah.
you go to the East Coast, people are still looking for flower sales. I mean, people are still looking for shatter on the East Coast. So each market has its own like maturity cycle almost, where people start with what they know, which is going to be flower, and then they start looking for more convenience sort of products, which will be all-in-ones or infused pre-rolls, those sort of product lines. So generally speaking, in every market we see that consumer uh, kind of shift in their consumption preference.
Hmm.
Yeah,
Hmm.
and balanced with that too is that more so than politics, cannabis is extremely local. So preferences towards certain products may be very specific to the more micro locality than you would anticipate. Some in older populations really are for edibles and topicals and tinctures and things of that nature. And so when you're looking at the data, not only do you have to look at the state, but you have to really look at the strongest stores within each of the regions, within each of the municipalities, and really balance it out. So it's really doing the calculus as the plane is taking off every day of the business.
Yeah, yeah. And so we didn't really touch on it. Are you entering New York? We talked about New York. Are you going to New York?
Yeah, we're talking with a couple partners there, but there's a few other states that we think we would likely get a higher ROI on that are more limited license or medical turning to rec. And as New York shakes out, there is a lot of capital being spent by a number of competitive brands. And I think New York is one of those states where you can look at it and you don't necessarily need to be first to market. Some states, it's critical to be first to market. Others, it isn't. And what we found is that there's that give and take where you have to really make that decision. Um, but really, there's a couple places around there that we're looking to really launch in the next couple quarters.
Yeah, both smirking. That's funny.
Yeah, 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 yeah. Mum's the word. Mum's the word.
Mum's the word. But okay, so talk to me then about first, market mover advantage, right? Because I'm a dispenser. Okay, so let's go through the process. State goes, yeah, we're going to open this up. And then we're going to start licensing for brick and mortar, sometimes online. Now you've got your licensees, they're in there. We know where we need to be. They start building out the retail location. Uh, you know, I know that the SKU count ranges, location to location, state to state. How important is it to be one of the first in operating within your category to the shelf versus we're going to wait and see what happens, and then we're going to come in a little bit later on. And are certain markets set up differently when it comes to that? Meaning, yeah, New York, maybe not such a big deal because it's just going to be a complete turnover, right? But maybe Michigan was a little different. Maybe, Washington was a little different. How important is that first mover advantage?
What I would say is the first mover advantage is important perhaps for some of the what I'd call the state brands. So what we've seen is that in a handful of these states, there'll be one or two of the strongest state vertical operators. I think that's really important for those groups to go in and really concretize themselves in their home market, similar to how we did in Washington. But
Mhm.
what we typically find is that there's a cash cycle where a group will come in, expend a lot of capital, effort, energy, and resources, hit top 10, and then sort of decline as another group comes in and does it. So we see crests and waves of growth in a lot of these markets, especially the ones that have severe price compression or
Mhm.
reciprocity or uh, oligopolistic structures where there's only a handful of some of the strongest cultivators, manufacturers, and retail.
Mm.
But what I will say is that like Dylan had alluded to, when you can come into a market with product that is of higher quality, better consistency, more reliability, and stronger support in terms of the sell through, you start to see that in the data and you start to see reorders increase in terms of rapidity as well as size of the basket. And so, in a lot of ways, Dabstract is able to come in to new markets, whether it's establishing itself as one of the first brands or one of the new brands through that kind of support,
Mhm.
and really bringing that credibility to product.
Got it. Got it. Okay, so my question is this, Dylan, this is very much directed to you, is, you've got a successful product lineup, right? Certain states you have certain products, other states you have other ones. How much of your time is spent staying with the mainstays versus innovating? Because I just imagine between you and the team, you're probably a mad scientist of some sort, wanting to, play around with different formulations. But I mean, Dabstract at the end of the day, you're known as high terpene extracts, right? This is what you're very much known for. But you gotta be innovating, I'm assuming. And how much of that time do you spend doing that?
Yeah, good question. I think right now my main focus is bringing, you know, more unique genetics to market through our process and products. I see, I think where this industry sort of falls short sometimes is really bringing uh, new and unique flavors and genetics and terpene profiles to market, and communicating those like nuances and interesting parts of cannabis to consumers. I think we're still really lagging behind what more established uh, industries have been able to do with how they're communicating about products. And frankly, we still have a lot of work to do. But I really would like to see the cannabis market and industry just mature a little bit more
Mm,
when we're talking about terpenes and genetics and all these different things. We did a lot more innovation early on our products, but at this point, I've refined and dialed in our vape carts and all-in-ones, uh, really to the point where I'm very enthusiastic and happy with where that product stands right now. And it just, how do I bring more of that to market? How do I bring uh, a new flavor to market? How do I, it's that sort of process that I'm really focused on right now. Um, More so than like, hey, how do I do a botanical hemp infused vape cart and send that into market?
right.
You
Yeah,
know?
please don't do that. Yeah, and I'm curious though, like because you guys are obviously very connected and understand the consumers. Are consumers buying by the experience, the high, the brand, the flavor? Because again, I'm not a bud tender, haven't spent time behind a counter. But typically, I think the questioning is, I'm looking for a vape. Okay, do you want a cart? Do you want an all-in-one? As the bud tenders are going through their breakdown, right? Do you
Mhm.
how high do you want to get? Is it for bedtime? Is it for this? Is it for that? Where in that conversation does the flavor part come into it? And how do you differentiate yourself from, some of the other, let's call flavorant additives that are out there versus, HTE?
It's it's a challenge. In terms of how the consumer is looking for products right now, I think hybrid indica sativa used to be like, and still is in some markets, still the defining factor.
Mhm.
It's all effects based. But we're starting to see a shift, especially in some of the more mature markets, of people looking for, hey, I don't necessarily believe the hybrid indica sativa designation anymore. I'm looking for this terpene because I think I'm going to get that effect from it. So I think there's still a lot of consumer education that needs to happen, and you know, uh, maturity that needs to happen for people to really understand what they're looking for to get that consistent experience, or understand what works best for them. Because
Mhm.
you know, I think we've all smoked cannabis that this didn't necessarily give us the effect that we wanted at any given time. But why does that happen? And what are we doing as a brand to create that level of stability or um, comfortability for a consumer?
Mm. Right, right. Okay. All right, let's shift to, you guys have assessed the Canadian market. There's been other US brands that have made their way into Canada. Some have had some success. Others fell flat on their face. Will we see Dabstract in Canada? Say yes. No, but what is it you're assessing? Does it come down to that partnership level again? I mean, because it's a whole other world, right? And obviously choosing that partner is crucial to the success of because it's another state basically. Well, hold on. In case Trump is listening, I'm
Yeah,
not
yeah. Be
endorsing
careful. Be
I'm
careful.
not endorsing Canada as the 51st state, although I'd love to be able to travel freely to see our
Uh,
friends here. No, I mean, like, what does it come down to? Because obviously, entrance into Canada would be an opportunity, right? You've got that brand staying power, when it comes to SEO, but then maybe that's how you assess whether or not you wanted to go to another, right? Australia or somewhere in Europe or whatever it might be. Walk through that process, what you found was working, not working. Just lay it all out, I guess.
Yeah. We're definitely interested in international expansion. We're talking with a number of groups, all over the world to bring Dabstract, to their countries. What we've also seen is that there's a large export business that's starting to develop. So really what's important is finding the absolute best partner that could give you global reach and has that distribution and those relationships already in hand or are developing. Some places will be very difficult for us to enter into just given the limited nature of their product SKUs, right? Some groups only allow or some state or countries only allow very specific medical based products that, will not, we can't really exist in yet.
Mhm.
But when it comes to Canada, when it comes to Australia, we look for groups that have strong cultivation, like Dylan had said, a deep bench of genetics. I always joke around. I don't know if it's around anymore, but out of Washington, I always say we're like 31 flavors. We always have so many strains available for people to try, for people to get into, and really, drive trial that then ends up creating the loyalty for the brand, right? You'll smoke a certain strain a couple times you like it. You want to try something different, but the same from the same group of strong manufacturers and cultivators. So that's really what we provide. So when we look at Canada, we look at groups that we believe would have a strong capital future and also have a robust cultivation access and provision as well as manufacturing capability because Canada too, it's my understanding that cannabis is relatively inexpensive. There's a lot of price compression, and so we need to make sure that we're sensitive to our partners' concerns as well. They need to make money, they need to be cash flowing, and they need to have good margins. And so, where do we put both of these things together is really when we provide accretive value. And so, as we expand, even in the United States and internationally, we look for groups where we can be additive to whatever they're already manufacturing, whether that's getting products with slightly higher price points, having products that can have more volume in sales, other products that they could market in different new innovative ways. And that's what we always try and push for here, where in the United States, where if there's a jurisdiction that's particularly onerous with marketing or rules in that respect, we'll really do a deep dive into what we're able to do, what's appropriate, and what our partner is comfortable with.
Mhm.
So in a lot of ways, we have to find the right group, but it always comes down to economics and it comes down to capability.
Yeah.
And I think whenever we look, even in the acquisition space, that's what a lot of groups are going to be looking for is that capability, and that depth of bench.
Mm. Yeah, as you're going through that response, Eli, I'm questioning the ability for some of the companies in Canada right now. And I think there's some that have, and they would check all those boxes, right? Not even just being a partner. So just operating in the space, period. They have great facilities, they have great genetics, they have incredible grow teams. Where they fail in a lot of cases, going back to our earlier part of the conversation, is how well are you supporting your bud tenders and the retailers? And I've seen this time and time again. This is where a lot of the failure happens in Canada. Again, their margins are good, that everything seems to work, but for some reason it's the follow through, ensuring that you have the presence, that yeah, our marketing is restricted, but it doesn't mean you can't, period. Right. And a lot of that marketing needs to be geared towards those retailers, those bud tenders to ensure they're aware of your brand. They've tried it. They, you stand behind it. Oh, my vape is clogging. I've had 7 returns this week alone. How are you dealing with that? When you call the number on the package, is someone answering, right? And in a lot of cases, I mean, I've done it. I just call them randomly. The mailbox is full, that you can't get through with an email. Like it's not the way that you would want to treat your consumer. And for bringing that expertise of who you are at the core of a brand to Canada, I see those opportunities, assuming all those other boxes are checked, as you say, right? Can they produce? Can they get the genetics? Does all that make sense? You're already doing the other side of it, right? Which is, to me, I guess they're equally as important, but to me, I see a lot of high-fiving after SKUs are made and they've finally gained distribution and back to the drawing board. We're going to do something else. And that's really where the job began, right? Is at that point of distribution now. How do you assess international market? I mean, in the US, you can't even take it, I can't supply from Washington to Illinois with my biomass. How do you assess? Is it the same assessment? Like, how do you look at, say, a European market? And if you were to look at that, would you have to go by way of Canada or Australia, perhaps? Or like, what does that look like?
Yeah. In so many ways, the core analysis is always, I believe, is going to be substantially the same, but
Mm,
it comes down to the reliability and the education that our partner or potential partner can give us. So, for example, we've been talking with a group for a number of years and developing the relationship, always looking at what the market data looks like, seeing how their markets are evolving, seeing how their export rules work, seeing how their products are becoming more adopted by groups, even if it's just medical today. And so, in a lot of ways, the calculus is the same, but the variables are always slightly different or slightly off, but the same principles will apply. We need to have great supply that's extremely varied or as varied as possible. We need to have them capitalized to do the manufacture, and then we need them to have good distribution. For example, in Australia, when you look at a market like that, there's a strong physicians network, and that's really how distribution is done, which is
mm,
much different than retail in the United States and California versus retail in Illinois versus retail in Florida, where you can't even have a wholesale market because
right.
it's a forced vertical that's very strict. And so when you look at all of these different places, it's where can a brand offer the most for their partner and where can it offer the most long-term staying power.
Mm,
And I think when you look at that through that lens, there's a lot of places that reveal themselves as very clear, right? That that you can really do well in a place that has a lot of the sort of the hallmarks that we'd be looking for, like limited licensing, or a market that doesn't have a social equity program that can't be substantiated by capital or common sense, which
mm,
is really tragic in a number of the places that we've looked at, because I think in a lot of ways those kinds of programs are what a lot of what cannabis has been built on, but those who have been actually affected aren't the ones who are being taught how to operate, aren't the ones who are being taught how to raise capital. And so in a lot of these different markets, you're going to see all those different kinds of nuances. But internationally, I'd say it's very much the same, just with different characters, different rules. But the objective is similar.
mm. Okay, that makes sense. And then, we mentioned price compression. Dylan, I like to ask this of a lot of the OGs. What the fuck is going on with or cannabis pricing? Like the price of a quarter has not changed, it seems like, in 25 years. And if anything, the price just keeps going down. It's completely against what economics would tell us in any other industry.
Yeah, I think it plays into what's happening in any given market. Washington's a good example of, um, I guess, what not to do to a certain degree when the state basically gave anybody and everybody a license when that
Mm,
first went recreational. We had, uh, don't quote me on the number, but like 600 plus cultivators for a period of time, and everyone's sitting there trying to stay in business over the last uh, 9, 10 years that Washington's been recreational. And so You have these mom and pops out there who are just struggling to survive and just selling for as cheaply as they can just to get that, try to generate some revenue. And we're still seeing that today. Like, I mean, over the years, we're buying fresh frozen or seeing fresh frozen on the market at 3 cents a gram or 4 cents a gram. And any cultivator listening knows that you can't make
Jeez.
any money there. So
Yeah.
it's people just trying to scrape by.
Yeah. Someone brought it up on it must a couple podcasts ago, but it was in the retail space within Canada. And I'm like, I don't know how some of them are hanging on. And they're like, well, they signed out of the gate 5-year leases for these retail locations. And now that those are starting, because we're about 5 years, well, we're 7, but 5 years in on the retail side, you're going to start seeing a lot of them just go, yep, I'm done. I don't have that big lease hanging over my head now. Especially when you get into Toronto and some of these, Edmonton or any of these other areas, they are expensive, and breaking those leases is quite expensive. So if they're able to just at least break even, but now they're coming due, right? Where in a perfect world, two different answers. Leave us with this. Where's Dabstract in 5 years?
Dabstracts in anywhere from 10 to 20 states. We have international distribution, and we're a growing brand still at that time. I don't think that the industry in the United States is going to mature substantially at a rapid clip. But what I will say is that Dabstract will be available and around, and you can pick it up wherever you'd like. Dylan, do you have anything to add to that?
No,
Oh,
I think
Dylan's
we're
got to have a
aligned on that.
completely separate answer. It's got to be completely
Oh,
different.
okay.
We wouldn't be business partners if there were different answers.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
I like pitting you guys together. Come on, let's see.
Yeah, I mean,
But I
we want that
mean,
national brand and national presence. We want consumers coast to coast to know who we are, and we want to be
yeah,
available to those consumers.
that
Yeah,
makes
and
sense.
one
And
thing
go
one
ahead.
thing that I will say is that there's a substantial amount of pride behind our products. So I know that when I'm handing someone our all-in-one, whether it's in Massachusetts, whether it's in Washington or Illinois, Missouri, Michigan, wherever we are and wherever we're going, you're getting the best product on the market. And I think that's a really incredible promise to be able to make. And I know and I trust Dylan and Derek beyond anybody in terms of being able to create those products for people. And that's a really important thing, especially as someone who joined the company, as it was growing, as it was happening, to be able to go and bring that to other people is a real blessing. And I think that's really where a lot of this national expansion excitement comes from, is being able to pick up a phenomenal product and having everybody associated with the brand telling us it's the best all-in-one that they've had in years, or telling us that our concentrates are really fucking fire. And I think that's really, really important for all of the people involved and everybody that's attached to our company and everybody that works with us.
Yeah. It seems that brand loyalty, it took some time, right? And I don't mean this just for Dabstract, but the early days there was so much, and there still is, and I think there's still some maturing to come, but there's just so much to try, right? You're like a kid in a
Yeah.
candy store, and it's like, "Oh, I'm going to try that one. I'm going to try nope, that one's shit. I'm going to try that one." But it seems that the consumer's starting to come around to, I only drink Bombay gin, or I only consume this type of cigarette or whatever it is, and they're finally starting to come around to that brand loyalty, understanding the consistency. It's going to be what I want, when I want it, where I want it. That's going to be, I think, the challenge for where you're seeing it in the US, right? What I'd love to see is that global brand power, right? Where, someone pops a Coca-Cola in Canada, it's probably going to be very similar in the US and in Japan, if Japan even allows it. I don't know. But yeah, I think that,
Coca-Cola?
yeah, I don't know. Yeah. What are you, crazy? He's talking
Yeah.
nonsense. No, but I think that's it's just a maturity, right? Or a level of maturity that's still yet to come. We're still quite young. I know, California early days, 94, 97, whatever, but in Canada at the federal level, like we're only 8 years in, right? And that seems like a long time, especially for anyone that's been operating in it. But really, cyclically for a product or a CPG, that's nothing. It's really nothing. So, anyways, gents, I appreciate your time. I realize how busy you are, how much you don't sleep. But I appreciate you taking the time to join me, and I'm looking forward to continuing conversations. We'll have you back on after you've launched into, that 20th state, and probably before then. But I do thank you for joining us, and thank you for sharing all this, your experience and wisdom with our audience.
It's our pleasure.
Yeah, thanks, Tom.
Awesome. Thanks, Jeff.